acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today, pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. We're on the Wurundjeri, on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I come from the land of the Cammeraygal people of the Eora Nation. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So we have some food for you. There'll be more coming, so we'll make sure it gets to the tables. Please, if you'd like some wine, just wave your glass and I'll direction, okay? And we've got some more people who'll probably join us too. But thank you for coming tonight. It's really great to have people together again. And I'm going to hand over to Jill. Jill Scanlon is one of our Melbourne leader and will facilitate this evening. Jill is a communications expert. She has an extremely illustrious background, but she's a journalist by profession. She's been working in communications for a long time. She works in sport matters and has been volunteering in Vanuatu not too long ago. So I'll hand over to Jill, who'll add anything she'd like to. And yes, thank you, Catherine. You can spread them around. Most of them are vegetarian, just not the chicken wings.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Another humanitarian development event, which hopefully will be a good one, and obviously on a very special topic on climate change. And I'm sure, as you all read, we picked climate change. We often put out feelers for what topics people would like to hear about, what subject matter and stuff within the aid development sector. Climate change is always one that now comes up in terms of not only as an issue in itself, but the way it obviously is having an impact on every other very high-profile development issue that we've always discussed before. So it's going to be very interesting, especially to hear from our three top speakers tonight. I will, rather than doing a whole lot of preempting about our climate change topic, because we'll get the late start and get conversations underway, I'll introduce our speakers. So we have three wonderful ladies joining us tonight. So Heidi Michael, we have, sorry, my things, I'm trying to get the pronunciation right. So Suzanne, Regina, thank you. Mary Picard, all joining us for a chat tonight. So what we might do is we might get straight into it, and we'll start with Heidi. Heidi is an engineer, which I found very fascinating. So an executive level engineer and leader with experience working in both the private and public and community development sectors across a huge range of social impact engineering and infrastructure projects. I'm very interested to hear about the social impact structures as they relate to climate change. Heidi thrives on strategy development and engaging stakeholders, which is always a really important part of what we do in the sector, and the collaboration that requires in building those relationships, leading and facilitating technical teams for sustainable social outcomes. So, Heidi, I'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about exactly, even though I've described things roughly that you do, what it is you do now, the sort of work you're doing and who for, and how that is linked to or impacted by the issue of climate change as we now understand?
Sure, and thank you everyone for having me as well. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting today and give my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. So I'm currently working with the Victorian State Government and the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. And this is a little bit of a few-year hiatus from international development. I was just saying to Suzanne, so sort of chosen as part of my journey to spend some time working in government here in Australia, because I found that my work internationally, that a lot of where I saw the change needing to happen was with governments in the countries that we worked in, and we're working in that space as well as for our At the moment, a lot of our work that we focus on, so I'm in the Loddon Mallee region, which is for those that are not familiar with Victoria, it's pretty much from Macedon all the way to Mildura. Covers 1/5 of the state, and we have 11 traditional owner groups. Some of those are recognised and some are not, and we work with them, those traditional owner groups, as well as a lot of stakeholders, including catchment management authorities, as well as local government agencies and other government agencies around natural resource management, water resource management, climate change adaptation, and mitigation strategies with all of those stakeholders, and particularly with traditional owners, and ensuring that they have a lead role in a lot of that. So some of that is around ensuring that traditional owners are leading on things like cultural burning and bringing in their traditional practices around fire management and natural resource management, and then also with water resource management as well. There's a lot of very challenging political aspects in there because policy is not fully developed or developed adequately to support traditional owners to take on that sort of lead in management. So that's the work, well, my role in that is community and partnerships regional manager. So we have a team that work on engagement partnerships as well as the climate change element, and working with all of our Aboriginal partners as well. And then we work with other teams in the department. So environment, land, water and planning is pretty much everything that the department does. So we get to work across all those very interesting places. So one of the examples that we've worked on recently, for those who may know Hanging Rock, which is not far from Melbourne, is looking at redesigning the precinct there so that it has more of a cultural focus, but also ensuring that it's going to survive and be well managed for all of the changing climate that we're faced with at the moment. And one of the big things that challenges was that there's 3 traditional owner groups who all believe that their boundaries are to manage the Hanging Rock area. And so a lot of the work the team is doing is sort of looking at that from a climate change perspective, but also from who's going to manage that from traditional owners and all the political challenges that come with that. So yeah, that's my role at the moment. But previously I was very much in water and sanitation and international development. So across Asia Pacific I worked with Engineers Without Borders for about 7 years. And before that spent some time in East Timor working on water and sanitation projects.
So in terms of the international work, especially with Engineers Without Borders, at that point, was climate change, when you were working with them, was climate change emerging as a major factor that you had to take into consideration in terms of the development angle?
Definitely started to become a bigger factor. Like I recall probably about 5 years ago, we were working on a project that we had titled Sanitation in Challenging Environments, and it was very much about working with communities who did what we had defined as challenging environments, or our Cambodian partners had. And it would be where places where you couldn't just go and dig a pit latrine or a toilet, which was a bit of a standard, safe, somewhat safe, hygienic toilet option. And so that was places where they were prone to flooding or prone to drought, or in areas that was hard rock. And so we saw more and more that prone to flooding and prone to drought was becoming more extreme events and more regular, and it was more difficult to plan and develop technology to address those situations. And so we quickly saw that it was more about resilience in the community, building that ability to adapt their own technologies to managing those changing climate situations.
So the really obvious issues that may have cropped up would be, like you say, in areas where there were drought conditions. If you're working in sanitation and water, you're obviously doing maybe the wash program or something, and therefore access to water or how water is to be used. I mean, we're used to water regulations in terms of how much we use during drought times. I would imagine that would have a big impact, and how you relate that to the locals in terms of they can't just use water when they have it, but they need to still be doing that wash program.
Yeah, and I think the big thing, like when I worked in East Timor, I lived there for a few years, working directly on water projects and working directly with the communities out in really rural areas. And one of the things that became clear was that the natural springs that they were very reliant on were drying up more and more frequently. And one, that meant that they either had to find new springs, which were usually much further away, which meant someone had to go and get that water and spend more time, which usually was on the women and children. And so all of these ongoing impacts across the community were huge. And you guys will talk about that a lot as well. But we quickly saw that, yeah, again, it was that drying climate and trying to access water. It was really challenging for a lot of communities and in different ways. And another one that I really found interesting was their cultural connection in Timor to water sources was being challenged, because there were some water sources that were culturally or spiritually not what they wanted to access. They had special beliefs around that, and so they were really challenged by that, because they were saying, well, there's no other water. And so all of these impacts are really difficult for communities that didn't have piped water or a really secure water source. So we're always, yeah, again, looking at that from more of a social perspective. How do you build the resilience of the community to adapt their own solutions?
So that just adds another one of those elements, doesn't it, to it all, in terms of negotiating with the locals as stakeholders and participants and stuff in any of the programs.
Yeah, it was very much trying to, depending what program it was, I did work with the US government funded program for a while, which was really challenging, but Engineers of the Waters was a bit better in that sense, but very much about working with the community on what they felt was the best solution, and always trying to train up the local community to have those technical skills to be able to either build their own systems or at least maintain and operate ones that we might have.
Yeah, it's a lot of capacity.
Yeah.
So in terms of you personally with your career, working as an engineer in the development sector and obviously working internationally, how hard is it for you as a woman as an engineer? Are there quite a few working in development? Number one, quite a few female engineers, but also working in the development sector, like going down that pathway with that sort of skill set?
It's probably hard for me to know, because I work with engineers at Waters and we were all mostly engineers, and there's lots of women that work in development in engineers with Waters as well. But I would say, generally in engineering there is not a lot of women. It's a very small percentage. I think Engineers Australia just put out an article saying there's only 13% of women who are engineers in Australia. It's super low, and that's, for me, I feel one of the big things was it's really important to have diversity in those engineering teams, because if you don't have diverse thinking and diverse engagement from the community, you're not going to get all the solutions and the right or the best approach for managing that. And so that was actually a big thing that has inspired me to co-found the Women in Engineering Pacific organisation. So we set that up in 2020, and we've now got a membership of about 50 female engineers from across the Pacific from about 7 or 8 countries. So we meet whenever. We're all busy women, but it's been amazing. We've been able to, because of COVID, everyone got used to being online. And I don't think it would have happened if it wasn't for COVID. And we have members from PNG, Fiji, Vanuatu, Nauru, Tonga, Timor, and Australia and New Zealand. So it's really exciting that there are women across those countries, and so part of that is to really just support them and provide a platform like this, with a big inspiration, thanks Chris, for those women to know that they've got the support around them and to go out and do it. And so this last year we launched the organisation with International Women in Engineering Day in June, and we did a big online event, and then this year they all did in-country events. So there was the first Fiji event, the first Vanuatu event, and the like. So really exciting.
That is very exciting. And that's sort of the thing you're aiming at, isn't it? I mean, apart from the work you do, which is what we like to discuss here as well, it's also how organisationally and how, in terms of participation from a work point of view, career point of view, women are getting involved in the different aspects, especially something as specialised as engineering. So that's really good.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the women are working in different sort of engineering spaces, but they're all really aware of, particularly in the Pacific, the impact of climate change on their communities, and they all hold roles in their workspace, but their families, their communities, they are leaders, they want to make a change, and it's really exciting just to watch them, being part of their world.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you so much, Heidi, for telling us about that. Okay, so now we move on to Suzanne. So Suzanne Regina is the CEO of Plan International, which is a child rights organisation, as we know. Very passionate about championing young people, a big believer in humans being united rather than being divided. Keen interest in design thinking, which I think is very interesting, and human-centred design. Co-designing solutions to problems like poverty, gender equality and climate change. As I was saying, we have, along with health and education, really key elements always of the development sector that have to be addressed constantly. And working across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, which for us, especially in reference to climate change, are our main areas. Obviously it's our region and our main areas, and the ones globally pretty much that are fairly highly impacted by climate change. So Suzanne, maybe you'd like to talk to us a little bit about your role as the CEO in Plan International, work it does, International, the work it does, obviously child and youth focused, and how you're finding, apart from, tell us a bit about your career and how you got there, but then also about how climate change as an issue is starting to play a part in decisions around development.
Big question.
Sorry. I should know better than to double barrel my next. I shouldn't double barrel.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and I want to pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. I acknowledge that the land was never ceded and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I actually wanted to just start by, I just wanted to acknowledge that it's a hard time to be alive if you're interested in justice, equality, and a sustainable environment. Because there seems to be so much going on in the world at the moment. Conflict, wars in all kinds of places. Tomorrow the sector will launch a big campaign to fight famine, because we have an enormous number of people in the world on the verge of famine as we speak. Now I say that as a 53-year-old woman. I last remember talking about famine in the 1980s, and I feel like I'm in a spiral back in a sort of place. We have the release of this report today on the state of the environment, and there just seems so much. I know that people are, you've got COVID, you've got a pandemic happening as we speak, just so much to be carrying, and I often look to art and poetry as inspiration for me, and I just wanted to start, if it was okay with you. There's a poem by Amanda Gorman. She's a young African-American poet. You've probably heard some of it. She has a poem that's called The Hymn for the Hurting, and it's a weird way to start, but I think it's really important because for me it's about also where the place for change happens. Is that all right?
Of course it is, yeah, absolutely.
Love it. Everything hurts. Our hearts shadowed and strange, minds made muddied and mute. We carry tragedy, terrifying and true, and yet none of it's new. We knew it as home, as horror, as heritage. Even our children cannot be children, cannot be. Everything hurts. It's a hard time to be alive, and even harder to stay that way. We're burdened to live out these days while at the same time blessed to outlive them. This alarm is how we know we must be altered, that we must differ or die, that we must triumph or try. That while hate cannot be terminated, it can be transformed into a love that lets us live. May we not just grieve but give, may we not just ache but act. May our signs right to bear arms never blind our sight from shared harm. May we choose our children over chaos, may another innocent ever be lost. Maybe everything hurts, our hearts shadowed and strange, but only when everything hurts may everything change. I wanted to start there because for me that is kind of a story that I think is true, that kind of place where, you know, stuff is. I came to the sector to be honest, my story is I started as a youth activist, as a student myself, as a secondary school student in a youth-led international movement run for by and among secondary school students. We were trained in social analysis and how to understand what's going on in the world, and our mission was to take action to make it better. We worked on campaigns that sometimes are a challenge to me because they're an echo of the things I still see in the world. We worked to end apartheid in solidarity with activists in South Africa and all over the world. And I attended my first meeting with Pacific when I was 21, where I talked to people from Nauru who were telling me about this thing called global warming and how it would result in their countries being underwater in 1999. And they talked then about their great hopes for these green climate funds that would come and help them mitigate and adapt. How we had at that stage responded to, all too young to know this, but you know, there was a hole in the ozone layer and the world acted to close that off. And so there was a kind of optimism at that time that while we had managed to do that, we could also deal with this global warming thing that was on the horizon but which was in our grasp to manage. So 25 years on, we haven't heeded that call. It's much more urgent, and the need to act faster is there. The thing I take heart from is that I think all the technology and the wherewithal exists in the world for us to manage this issue. Last week when I saw photographs from that new space telescope of our universe and the universe beyond, humans are amazing. I think we can do incredible things. What we need to do is harness the political will and the will of movements to change it. So I came to this work through a kind of activist approach, and not unlike Heidi, I set about working in service delivery. I worked in the front line, and then I wanted to understand how policy and politics work. So I spent most of my life working in politics, in the public service, and then in politics. And then I worked for 4 years as a chief of staff to a Minister for Energy and the Environment, where we were in Victoria trying to close the reliance on coal. We introduced a renewable energy target, an energy efficiency target. We were hopeful of a national carbon price that might drive a transformation in that sector. I was pretty burnt out, to be honest, and I'd spent years kind of trying to make things not be in the newspaper. And I really thought about what I wanted to do next, and I thought, I want to get things in the newspaper. I've got to put things on the agenda that I think are urgent, and I've been working for my whole life. And I was drawn to Plan because it said, we don't just work for children and young people, we work with them, and that was an echo to that youth activist in me. And so I felt like it was a kind of calling, and I had this particular focus on girls and on gender equality. I'm the eldest of 4 girls. So it was kind of, and they had this major campaign called Because I'm a Girl, which was really around the barriers that get hold of girls. That's the story. That felt like the story of my life, that I was constantly being told things I couldn't do. So there was all these echoes. My sisters had had children, they were both girls, and I thought, and I've been trying to have a baby for 10 years, and I have been unsuccessful. And I kind of started to think, maybe I'm not going to have children of my own, but I'm going to be an amazing auntie. And I thought, aunties are really important. And I also thought, well, maybe I can work for an organisation that works for the world's poorest and most marginalised children. I could put my auntie energy into something kind of bigger than myself. So that's kind of how I came to the Plan. And a year later, I did have a baby, but that didn't change my passion or desire to work in the sector. It just made me realise I want for all children what I want for my own children. And so in a way that has spurred me on more to kind of want to work in that field. So that's kind of how I came to it. And I came to Plan at that time, and I've had 3 different jobs before I was the CEO. And to be honest, I applied for that job of the CEO. I never thought that I had hope in hell of getting that job, but I thought I will be the floor, and if anyone coming in will have to be better than me, and if they're better than me, I'll learn. And then when I got the job, I was quite shocked. And I've spent the last 5 years trying to work out what I'm supposed to do. Which Jen will tell you is work in progress. we work all over the world at Hadley. We work on water and sanitation, we work on a whole lot of different things. But one of the things that's really so clear to us is that girls and young women are often at the forefront of the climate change. Well, they're at the forefront of many of the movements for change in climate change. We think about Greta Thunberg, but there are many across the world who are working in that space. But they're also quite hard hit by changes. Like they're often the people collecting water or wood. They are really affected by hunger crises. They eat last and least. And so we're starting to really see that impact. So our focus in the last few years has really been on how do we mobilise young women themselves as leaders, but also really think about how we bring them into the design of disaster risk reduction, how we are involving them in co-designing solutions, and particularly really thinking about young people that we are talking with, especially in the Pacific. They want the skills to have, they want education that will allow them to create low carbon economies and societies. They want the skills to understand this kind of world of climate change and how it works, and they want to influence it, and they want to be part of the decision making. They don't want to give up their country. It's one of the saddest events in my life that really has stayed with me is a civil society meeting I attended in Fiji, and it was organised by Civicus, and it was an amazing meeting in Fiji. And I met these young people from come to me, one of the islands most affected by climate change. And they were crying in their presentation about the fact that in their lifetime they would have to probably leave their home. And what would that mean for everything to do with their culture, their ancestry, their future? And their government had already made plans for them to move to Fiji. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, in my lifetime, those people, that's a real consideration. They will have to leave. Who are you when you don't have your land, when it no longer exists? And I just kind of was so moved by that. I just thought, these young people, I guess this is where I come from in plan, is I would say one of the biggest child rights violations is the fact the failure to act on climate change. Robbing people of a stable climate and the capacity to live in harmony with nature, to me, is the biggest child rights violation that I can imagine. And so it has these intergenerational impacts, and so I feel very compelled that now I don't think Plan is doing nearly enough. I think we are working, I think the things we're doing are great at the edges, but nothing we are doing at the moment, and I would say this is largely true of many in our sector, is at the scale required. So on the technical side in our projects, yes, climate change is a feature, but to be honest, in many of the places where we're working, where, for example, hunger is being made worse by climate change, it's like people are under so much pressure. We're not really designing in some of those long-term livelihood and solutions that are really going to give the long-term results. And that's why I would say the other part that we've been doing is advocacy. Training young people as advocates to speak out and working in all the fora that we can with others to really call on the countries like Australia that are contributing a lot to this problem to do much more. We would see that as a legitimate and a very necessary part of our action.
So what would be, as the boss of Plan Australia, like your Plan International, so you're saying you don't think you're doing enough as an organisation. Would that be, so that's your first step, is to talk at government level about to various governments about how you can partner with them, how they can, perhaps, and we all know we need more aid funding, but how that would happen, or is it more also about you looking at, as you said, the design of the project you're doing and the way they work?
Yeah.
How would you change those?
It's both of those things. So you were talking about water and sanitation. I've really seen this evolution, water and sanitation, even 5 or 7 years ago, did and still does have a focus on gender, which is right. But you're really seeing this next wave, this cutting edge of climate change that's cutting through. And to be honest, there's a dearth of technical experts who can really help us do that. There's not enough, people really trained in that area. That's where you've got to really draw on local knowledge, local And I would say, for a lot of people thinking about careers, you'd be saying, think about engineering in that way, because that will be a specialty that we will need to bring to our designs and our thinking. And then the other thing is, we would say in our climate financing, we know that girls' education is one of the many overlooked initiatives you can take that helps us to mitigate against climate change, and that women leaders do bring more of a focus on protection and environmental sustainability. And we've designed pilot programs, we're ready to go. They just need scale and they need investment. So yes, I would say we'll have those conversations with the government and we'll push them on their own targets, because clearly we need more action to be taken from everyone in the world who's currently emitting to do more. I think our partners in the countries of the Pacific and elsewhere rightly ask us to put more pressure on our own governments, because they didn't create these circumstances which they
It will be interesting to see after the couple of years we've been through and the work the government, especially the new government, will have to do, to see how their attitude towards aid and development, and we know the differences between the two different governments we have and have had, about that attitude, how they're going to pick up and try and make up some ground in terms of that funding, and therefore how they're going to apply it. Do they start looking at the effects impact of the pandemic immediately off the book, or do they start looking at these sorts of projects where they go back into investing in education? So like you say, the one thing I always noticed about the Pacific was that while education is a big thing, it is the girls who are far more enthusiastic and far more thirsty to take up educational opportunities than the boys, which is always good.
And one of the things that's linked to the poem that I read is I really do feel like, we are at a point, and during COVID, we consulted with young women all over the world, and they talked about a better normal. Their vision for a post-pandemic and the world is a better normal. And I think there is an opportunity in this to not think about how do we put things back, but they can't go back. I don't think back was good enough. We have to think about and reframing conversations about what would a better normal look like, and who does that include, and how do we design for that? Because we have to move and move faster than we have. I think we can. We've seen signs of that. And the pandemic's taught us that we can move faster when we need to. How do we bring that evidence into the climate change challenge?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nancy. That was really interesting. And finally, our final speaker is Mary. So Mary Picard. So Mary is a humanitarian and development consultant. She's the principal consultant and director in a development consulting firm. Is that right? So I'm just trying to write humanitarian development consulting. Consults on disaster climate development policy coherence, and has done for over 15 years, including analysis of policy, institutions, laws, and how to get systems working more effectively, which is always a big hurdle. Over the last 5 years, Mary's work has been looked at, and this is an interesting point I discussed with her before that we might open up for discussion, is that the convergence of the nexus between gender equality and reducing risk from both disasters and climate change, which are interrelated. I should just excuse my voice, sorry, I'm getting very, very croaky here. I came back from overseas with thunder with a very bad voice, so this is better than it was 2 days ago, but not good, sorry, my apologies. Mary's working on global projects as well as in the Asia Pacific region, and as I said before, that's obviously a key region for us of interest, with focus areas including the emphasis on risk governance, gender equality in disaster risk education, and adaptation to climate change. So Mary, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about what I've just described, but again, how in your career you've come to this point and the work you're doing in that consulting framework.
Thank you. I would also like to recognise that we're meeting on unceded sovereign Aboriginal land, and to pay my respects to the elders past, present and future. And to mention that I'm from Bunditj Mara country in southwest Victoria, which is where I grew up, and I've returned there 5 years ago after living in Melbourne for 20 years and in various countries for 16 years. So I've come home to roost. But how I got into this, well, I didn't have, I wasn't a youth activist and I didn't have a plan. And where I've got to is pretty accidental in many ways. I guess that the the thread that was always present for me was a passion for justice, for social justice. And initially in Australia, I trained as a lawyer and I worked in the trade union movement and in employment law. And then there came a point in the life of myself and my partner where we felt like we wanted to do something internationally. And he was the one who got the job in the UN system, and so I became the person who followed along. Some people call that a trailing spouse, which I've always hated as a description. And so I kind of had to reinvent myself. So I won't go too much on myself, but I basically did postgraduate international law in Geneva, where his first posting was. And I thought I'd be a international human rights lawyer, along with many other people apparently. And anyway, the next move was we were in Guatemala. So really what I'm doing now is because one tropical storm in Guatemala, because there was it was going to be a hurricane and then it was scaled down to a tropical storm, but that ended up being worse. And it just rained and rained and rained, a bit like what we've had in New South Wales. Very similar. And our back garden was kept, the water just kept going up because there was no more room for absorption. But what was happening in the rural areas was all the mountains that had been cleared and they'd farmed right up to near the tops of the mountains because they'd been pushed out of the land lower down by the big commercial farms, that became completely saturated. And there was one village that we had visited near Lake Atitlan in Guatemala, and the whole side of the mountain slid down, just turned into a muddy slush and buried 1,000 people. And so that was a really, really significant thing for me, because all the elements of things that shouldn't have been there in the first place combined with a natural hazard. So I ended up not doing international human rights law as such. I ended up doing work on disaster law, what's now called disaster law. And that was just because I happened to be there and someone I knew from Geneva was looking for a consultant, and it was an area I knew nothing about, and they said, well, the last person just dropped the bundle, so why don't you go? And so that was all about how you get international humanitarian assistance into a country and how those organisations work with people in a crisis situation. My co-director, Victoria, is there. I don't want to embarrass you, but Victoria was really kind of the beginner of this whole field of work. So she knows a lot about it, and you can ask her questions as well. So that was how it started, and then I gradually moved into a more of a focus on risk reduction and working with the International Federation of the Red Cross. That was who I started with. And I remember in 2012, when we were doing a project on disaster risk reduction, my boss at the time said, oh look, we need to talk about climate change and regulations around that. And my boss sort of said, oh, we're over that, aren't we? But people are not talking about that anymore, are they? I said, no, I don't think we are. Anyway, so then I had worked in discrimination law in Melbourne, and then finally in 2017 I had the opportunity to bring these things together, just with one project from the Red Cross Federation, and it was looking at gender equality, gender-based violence in disasters, and in the legal regulatory framework. So really sort of that sent me back to that nexus, and I really had to develop my own knowledge in relation to climate change, and so but it's all been very focused on the law and policy level. So sometimes that's really frustrating because you think, I really want to just get down into a community and do something. But on the other hand, it's a really important level. I think the design and the governance side of it that all three of us really have talked about. And I just really wanted to talk to you about one particular project that I've been involved with for the last 3.5 years, which nearly drove me insane, but we got to the end of it. And it was with the Asian Development Bank, and it was a project on women's resilience to climate change and disasters, looking at law and policy in 3 pilot countries. So we have a Fiji connection, we seem to have a common Fiji connection, and Mongolia and Laos. and which are all very different in terms of governance and risks. But one of the first challenges we had was they said, we just want you to look at the climate laws. And I was like, well, yeah, there actually aren't many. And well, what about the policies? Well, there's not many of them either, and they're not very good. And then the disaster laws, and they don't say anything about women, so like, where do we get? So really we developed a framework approach. My colleague and I developed this framework approach saying, well, you really have to look at the whole socio-economic situation of women, and in particular you've got to look at the laws on gender equality, the policies, the women's machinery in the country, and bring them into this conversation. Because we have the women's ministries over there, and when you talk to them they said, oh, we don't know anything about disasters and climate change, and we don't feel confident to go into those forums, and we don't have any money. And then you have the climate change ones that are starting to get the money, and then the disaster risk reduction people who are mainly focused on responding. And so one of the quite good things that came out of this project in the end, especially in Mongolia and Fiji, was actually using the convening power of the Asian Development Bank to actually bring those different actors together in their own country to workshop a whole lot of ideas about how they can work together and what the actual issues were. Because everywhere I go normally, you just don't see a connection between, you have the, and even in the environment ministry, the climate change people are a little subgroup, and in the disaster risk reduction area, they don't talk to them and no one talks to them. But we actually, on a positive sort of note in that, we really did feel that there was some changes, like within Fiji, the women's ministry became, although they still don't have much money, they actually got quite a lot of expertise in the risk reduction governance aspects, and they had open channels with the others. And so they were actually doing quite good gender mainstreaming into their new disaster risk reduction and their climate policies. And they've got one of the world's best climate change acts. And they even put some gender into it. So we were fortunate in the sense that we were there and doing our consultations with them while they were drafting those. And so it's really good to sort of see that some of the things that we suggested got in there. But obviously, implementation is really central, and implementation at community level as well. And in Mongolia, they had a really strong, and they had one of the world's best gender equality laws, and they're really good gender equality apparatus. But again, they had not made any inroads with the environment ministry. So, and their energy sector was totally stuck in coal, really, coal and oil. Yeah, so that was really interesting because again the women's machinery got new sort of entry and new priority with government, partly because of the ADB convening power, to actually initiate these new channels of communication. So they're doing some really good work on mainstreaming gender more into the climate change policies and disaster risk reduction. So their disaster risk people are very sort of, it's a very military type of structure, and it was very male dominated, which has been a feature of this whole field for many years. So that was good. I mean, we felt we made a lot less progress with us, partly because they're very resource strapped, and they have very few people to work on things, but also because of the very strong government silos. So I won't keep talking about it. I'll let people ask questions if you want to.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I'm intrigued by the selection of the three countries.
Yeah.
So Fiji, Laos, and Mongolia is an interesting selection.
Yeah. Well, the idea, I wasn't involved in the selection, but the idea was to get, they had to be in Asia and Pacific because of the mandate ADB, and they were trying to get three geographically spread and different countries, but they're all like obviously not highly developed countries, like highly developed economies. So yeah, that's really
that was one of them. Yeah, so they had to have a strong basis first.
Yeah. So it was kind of an experimental project for them because they do a lot of stuff on infrastructure and they do a lot of stuff on financing, and so we were kind of making it up as we went along to an extent, which was quite good because we were able to sort of shape the project in a way you often don't get the opportunity to do. Yeah, it was an interesting one for them. I think we just had the final workshop in June in Manila, and they had a lot of engagement from around within ADB, and often we get the barriers in there too. So you get the engineering people and the regional people talking to themselves and not talking to the gender people or the climate change people. So yeah, so that was actually quite good. I think that they're going to be doing some interesting stuff going forward from that.
Well, I was going to say, given you the way you said, in terms of both gender and climate change were not areas any of those countries to any great extent had actually included in policy or planning of any sort. Given the project's now done, did the ADB give any indication they're going to actually repeat that project using other countries? Because one would think there's still a huge number of countries that will benefit from that.
Yeah, I don't yet know what the next step is, or probably with LAS, they will probably do some continued work with LAS because there's still quite a long way to go there. So I don't really know how they will roll it out, but I do feel that they're going to do some interesting work in that area. Yeah. So, I mean, the other part of what I've done in the last few years has been at the more international level, at sort of high policy level, has been with UN Women on the traditional status of women this year, which is the General Assembly of the UN sort of sitting as the Commission on the Status of Women. And their theme this year was climate, environment and disaster risk reduction in relation to women. So I did a background paper for them last year. And I also worked with the UN Disaster Risk Reduction Agency on a joint project looking at women's leadership and the different sorts of risks for women in relation to disasters specifically.
So do you think the big agencies or the agencies of, say, the UN as an organisation are doing enough in relation to climate change, especially UN Women, where gender is involved in that, but in terms of climate change and the way it's impacting all the different areas of development?
Yeah. Well, I think they're trying. I mean, they have special programs focusing on disaster risk reduction and on climate change. I mean, UN Women is in a position where it has to spread itself quite thinly in a lot of areas. So a lot of what they're trying to do is to provide capacity development and tools and training so that others can do it. But so they do have some program, but it's not their big thing. I think the thing by main, when we look at this for the UN system, I think really the UN system needs to act together a lot more. And that was really the message about from the UN joint study is actually it needs to be a much more joined up approach and not the competition which you sometimes see, but also that they all had an obligation to have gender responsive policies and plans and design, and that they all should be doing some gender transformative work as well as gender mainstreaming, and not leaving it to UN Women, because UN Women can't do it all.
Just going back to one of your initial points where you were saying how the way you started, you actually went as a, we want to call them dependent spouse or attached spouse. And you therefore looked for opportunities for yourself. It's one of the things we often find comes up as a common denominator is that working in development, and from listening to the three of you, it also applies here, is that you go where opportunities emerge and you take those opportunities and see where that will take you in the development sector. Is that what you found in your...
Yeah, I definitely, yeah. I mean, it can be difficult when like one of the partners is in the UN system and they get moved around. But there's definitely that thing about taking opportunities that come up. So, I mean, I sort of had a kind of a plan or a concept, but it just completely changed. Okay, well, I'll have a go. And it was really a very hard project because I had to do it in Spanish as well. And I'd only been learning that for a couple of years. So, definitely, I've jumped into some things that, well, my mother always said I was one of those children that would sort of try anything, but I had this belief that I could do anything, but sometimes I find out that I couldn't. So, but as an adult, I have jumped into some things and then thought I'm really, really very up to my neck here, like how am I going to get through this? But I've always been very pleased I did afterwards because I love that the learning that you get. and the amazing experience with other people and other cultures that contact that you have. So, yeah, it's definitely a matter of being brave. I'd say be brave.
Very much so. I think we all find something I've certainly been reminded of lately is that the development sector epitomises that old cliche, it's life is what happens when you're making plans. I'm putting t-shirts. So life is definitely what happens when you're making plans. Like the development sector absolutely epitomises that. Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you everybody, all three speakers. Questions from the floor. There must be a few parties.
I always have a question.
Okay.
Now there is a question, but I just have to kind of start with a comment. So just listening to all of you speak, it made me think the worst thing that climate change can do to the sector is to make it just a cross-cutting issue that then becomes just things on paper that's a tick the box. Did you consider this? Did you factor that in? However, the best case scenario is what Naomi Klein talks about, which this changes everything, where she says this is something that actually fundamentally changes the systems and the structures and how we operate. And listening to each of you, Mary, you were talking about the systems and the policy and how it has to be a multi-stakeholder kind of approach. And then Suzanne, you were talking about how it needs to be at the scale and the pace, which makes me think that maybe that could help us push into the kind of long-term funding, long-term planning approaches rather than the short-term kind of quick programming, because you're not going to have any impact on climate change if you're just doing that. And then Heidi, you were talking about how there's like new expertise that kind of come into this space, and then also highly prioritising the kind of local expertise, because we can't possibly know that about your country and only you can know that. So where do you see in your work that those kind of different areas that climate change is actually pushing us towards making development practice better? Like where are we on that scale from cross-cutting to like transformational change in the sector?
Anyone can jump in.
I'm not sure
Like from like climate change is just a cross-cutting issue that they're making you tick the box versus it's starting to make development change the way we operate, and you're actually seeing those shifts in donors, in our stakeholders are engaging, like where are we at on that kind of scale?
Sure. I think it's probably variable, but I would say we're still down here. We haven't really. That's why I say I think we need to really use the opportunity that a pandemic and other things like hunger and other things are providing to rethink the whole model. Because I don't think it's going to be enough to do those cross-cutting, and I just don't think we're going to get there that way. And I think it'll become irrelevant if we cannot understand this as a systemic issue that requires a systemic response. But it's really hard to do. I don't want to underestimate what that is to do and what it involves to do that. But I think there are a lot of people thinking about it, and it's really interesting. I think where I find it really interesting is starting to connect up a whole lot of knowledges, First Nations knowledge with other knowledge, with it is really kind of starts to be like bringing new people into the problem solving and that kind of generating of ideas and bringing long wisdom and lots of knowledge to the table that we haven't always had or considered as valid or legitimate. That will help, I think, a lot with some of that stuff. But you're still going to need deep political work, from leaders, from governments, from others, to do it at a scale. I find it even the Green Climate Fund is just so disappointing. 20 years of and almost no money being released at all.
I work to save the children,
oh my God,
I was speaking to someone the other day and they're like, look, this huge pipeline and it's been 6 or 7 years and nothing's actually happened.
So that's deeply frustrating, I think. There's a lot we could be doing, we have to kind of unlock that. So I do think it needs to be more systemic. I don't think we're there. I think that is the challenge for us, is not to let ourselves just add it like a tick box and let that be enough. It won't be enough.
It feels a bit like, from a government perspective, and particularly state government here in Victoria, that it's a little bit like there's some people taking steps forward and some people taking some steps back. So the work we've been doing, or my team has, on climate change adaptation plans, that there's all this great funding committed for the whole state and across all these communities, and great neighbourhood houses coming up with all these great plans to mitigate and adapt to climate change. They got all the plans, that was all funded, and now they've stopped the funding to actually implement plans. And it's like, hang on, that like there's some people going yeah, and then some people down the other end of the spectrum making decisions that don't really quite add up. So I think this collaborative effort is so important because and that political will across the board is so important. Otherwise, you've got these people that are making decisions somewhere for whatever reason that it's not, getting those steps going forward. It's really frustrating. And I think that's probably going to be evident with the new federal government in terms of what you're seeing now and all these great visits out to the Pacific. And there's probably a few steps forward there that I suspect there might be some of those stepping steps backwards.
So what do you think is causing those problems in terms of it stalling? Is it just bureaucracy, like governance and bureaucracy to some degree and red tape, or is there another reason you think there are those elements, some elements that are taking that step back, like reversing, as it were?
My brief insight into state government is it is definitely about political play, and here in Victoria we've got an election coming up in a few months, and there are some, like right now there was an election promise that was made in the previous election that we have had to divert a whole lot of our resources to see that play out before this next election, and no one in our department agrees it's a good idea. And all this effort and resource, and it's like, how can a government function like this? And how, why? But it's because it was an election promise, and then the opposition will hold them to account. And so from that little insight, I suspect there's other similar things at play. But we've both had lots of experience as well, so we're different.
Yeah, I think what you're saying about government is probably true everywhere, really. I work with governments a lot, but I'm also not inside them and so there's always an element of mystery, especially when there's a language barrier as well, about who's really pulling these strings. And so, I've worked quite a lot on other things in recent years, but I don't speak Welsh, and so I have to rely on good national consultants who do cultural interpretation as well as language interpretation. But even for them, there's things that you don't talk about. You don't talk about the underlying, or they're not aware of them sometimes, the underlying power structures in our society. And all of us are not aware of those. And you notice them when you go somewhere else that's different. I think it's kind of human nature in that we like to segment things and do one thing at a time. And it actually is really hard for everyone, including the very highly developed nations' governments, to actually do integrated work. And it's a form of social change, and we have to think of it like that. It's just hard.
Yeah.
You think about it from like a point of view of say Lismore or places like that where you might map and say, actually, in light of what we think might happen, people can't live there. We don't think people should live there. It's such a difficult political decision, so you really need leadership there. And I think that's what climate change is going to do. It's going to challenge fundamentally things that we've accepted as our rights. And we're going to have to rethink some of those things and reimagine some of those things. And that requires leadership for the long term, not little selection cycles. So I think that's a challenge for us. And that what you see there, that's going to require that, I think Australians have pushed the government, even in this most recent election, especially women. But we've pushed the government on lots of things, and we'll have to lead them into places where they don't want to go. But that means something. Like there are places where our organisations who have big donor bases in Australia to ask that question: what role do we have to play in talking about these issues, helping educate our own supporters about why it's not just important. As we educate, it's not just an overseas issue. Increasingly, the issues we're working on are global, wicked, entwined, and they're entwined in all the systems, the trade, the economy. And we have to rethink some of those things, I think. I think that's why it's hard.
Other questions, sorry?
This sort of builds on that a little bit. So I work for WaterAid, and so Water for Women, and but now everything is labelled climate finance. And the push for ANCP, it's like whack climate on it as much as possible. So how do we ensure that that advocacy doesn't just result in this like, cool, we're just going to stick the climate label on it, and then we can publicly say that, yeah, we're doing something, and actually be doing something more than we currently are? How do we do that? I guess that's one of the question as well.
Anybody?
Well, I would just, this is not really answering that question, but
Yeah, well, you could be a politician.
one of the things I believe in is following the money. If you want to get stuff done, and since the money's in climate change, then that's probably the best way to get resources for programs on water and gender and so on. So I mean, that's a bit cynical, but when a lot of areas, like the areas in relation to women's equality, don't get a lot of money, and disaster risk reduction doesn't get a lot of money, but if it's got climate change with it, then perhaps you can get some of that green climate fund pot of gold that's very slow trickling out. So.
I don't know if it matters really, to be honest. I think we have to just just keep pushing for more. I think it's on us to be ensuring that what we do that is legitimate and really I don't know if we would hold ourselves up to saying that all of our programs are really in that space yet, and it's hard, isn't it? Because that requires a sort of self-reflection and an honesty with our donors that we are also in the process of learning as we go, but we have to learn, and we have to learn fast. So, I think if that's what they want to call it, I don't really care. But I feel like it is on us to make sure that what we're doing is legitimate, and that we're sharing what we're learning, so it's not being hoarded in some way. I think it just has to be shared, scaled, as much as possible. It's urgent.
I guess it's more of a comment following on from that. I'm picking up on the point that Mary mentioned about follow the money, and I think building the economic evidence base for demonstrating the importance of addressing climate change, and in particular women's role in it, is absolutely foundational, because at the heart of a lot of these issues are that women are already disadvantaged in most, if not all, I'm just going to say all, societies and communities around the world. They're financially disadvantaged, they're disadvantaged in terms of their rights, there are many, many ways, as we're all aware. But building up the case for how, I guess, economically important it is to include women in climate conversations, and building up those direct links. When people talk about women in climate change, it sounds a bit like a box ticking exercise, but actually we are talking about life and death situations. So just to take an example, and this comes from a project that I've recently been working on, if your country's early warning system has been designed and tailored by men for men, women die in disasters because they don't get the messages, they don't have control over resources, they don't have the means to be able to respond. And this costs everybody, and it's a very brutal way of putting it, but it costs everybody money. And a lot of the times when I've engaged with women at community level about issues about their empowerment, what is holding you back? Why aren't you getting those education opportunities? Why aren't you having a seat at the table when everyone's talking about disaster response and early warning and climate change? And their answer is not because we're experiencing domestic violence, not because we have unequal access to education. It's a lot of it about that very crucial issue of control of resources. And when women don't have control of resources within their own families, their status is lower. When women have control over resources within their own families, to the same level or maybe even more than men, they get to have a say in how those resources are spent. And, as I think a few of you have pointed out, women will tend to spend that on things that are protective, that are collaborative, that support the development of the community as a whole, not just the self-interest of a particular nuclear family. They think outside the box. And it's, I guess, demonstrating through evidence the ripple effect of that and how important that is for economies, how important it is for governments, how important it is for sustainability, all of those things. And if we can build that evidence base and present it in a coherent, comprehensive way, it will start to change minds, and it becomes not just a box ticking nice to have. It becomes, if we don't do this, we're all in trouble. You know, this impacts everybody, whether you're a man, woman, or child. So I think those resources issues are at so many levels. You know, they're at the top issue, the top level of access to money to climate change, but they're also at this very, very grassroots level of women having money within their own households to spend as they, on them and as they see fit. And that's, and every level in between.
I agree with you, but all I would say is that the evidence on, for example, girls' education and its catalytic effect in developing sectors, or investment in women in peace and security, all of this exists and has existed. So it requires, like, I think the evidence is there. I think the funny thing is, I don't think we should accept that just having rational evidence and arguments is going to get us there, because there's still a patriarchy.
Yeah.
And it's a patriarchy, you know what I mean?
You're about to hit on my favourite phrase. Smash the patriarchy.
But still, like, we think absolutely, even in terms of political circles and what's investment in. Like investment in women and girls is like, really smart, you know. You'd rather be a plant because you would get more. I'd rather be a lost dog. You'd get more money if you were a lost dog, you know, than you were a good girl. So I think sometimes believing that the evidence is the answer. I don't think it is just the evidence. Right? It's also how we campaign, argue, and influence men and the patriarchy to actually see this as worthwhile and valuable. If anyone's got an answer on that, come in here.
I'm just talking about patriarchy because one of the things in this ADB project, a lot of what we were doing in these country workshops was basic gender education about like what is inequality, and like it's not just treating everyone the same. Equality is not just treating everyone the same, and understanding systemic discrimination and systemic inequality. And actually a lot of the women's organisations didn't really have that background either. But giving people a way of talking about it, so and actually I just found a couple of times where I thought, we really got to that person, like this guy from the National Emergency Management Authority in Mongolia understood. It's a nice feeling. Sorry.
That's a win. They're only small, but they're there. Yeah, that's true.
I just had a question, and also continuing sort of on thread. My question was about, I picked up on a few of your talks that, you know, bringing women in and engaging women and empowering women is so important. But from my very limited experience, I've sort of, what I've seen is that women are like, they're empowered, they're ready, they're good, they're good to go. Like, you know, in Australia, in you know, East Asian Pacific, in developing countries, and then this touches on the whole patriarchy thing, the issue, and then the evidence is there, the evidence is good to go. We've got all these pieces lined up, but then the real issue is the sort of male gatekeeper issue to a lot of these, you know, big level structural government, lawmakers, policy, and all these, they're kind of like, so, and even at the community level, you know, the village chief, there's always this like male gatekeeper of cultural norms, of, you know, it just happens at every single level. And in my past role, I had some work in gender transformative programming and trying to bring men in to do that sort of behavioural change. And the issue that we found was that we'd run these gender transformative projects and only women would show up. It's like, you know, there's a great feminist book on the patriarchy, and we've all read it, but no, the people who need to read it aren't reading it. And I guess my question is, how have you, across your, you know, amazing experience between all of you, come to find programs that are including men, in the gender element of gender, because we have to talk about gender as in women, but bringing men in and creating sustainable change by shifting their belief systems and their values in order to have sort of more an equal, and sustainable change. I don't know if that makes sense. Sorry.
It's such a good question, and like Plan does, it works with boys, men, and men for that reason. You're not going to get gender equality by just working with girls. And in fact, some of the tension in our organisations were all about girls' leadership, and actually girls themselves will say, can't bear the weight of transforming the world. I know it's too much. Like I can't do that, and I don't want to do that by myself. So there is a program that we have, which unfortunately is named Champions of Change, because there are other programs that I think are called that but don't really do that. This program really does. It works with young. It started in Latin America. It works with boys and works with women as well, girls. They work separately and then they work together, and they really are looking at masculinity. They're looking at how is that defined and what does it do. They're looking at like the norms and the behaviours, and they're asking themselves questions, and they're having dialogue, facilitated dialogue about what those things do and how that manifests. And they talk about in terms of sex, relationships, chores, and they talk about real things. And it has been proven to have really powerful transformative effects.
But do the boys show? I don't guess
They
maybe
do,
you're
they
working
do,
at an
they do.
adolescent level,
Adolescent.
because I think in the program I was working it was the adult population and the men just weren't showing up.
Yeah, so this
But maybe it's like starting at that.
I do remember, I think this is really interesting. I mean, we did this kind of retrospective study in Zimbabwe over in a community over a long time when we worked on rights-based work and with women and men in that community, what had changed, if anything. And what was really interesting to me was the women said the thing that was most transformative to them was the realisation that they actually had rights in relation to all kinds of, like, you're not allowed to be beaten, hit and raped, abused. The actual knowledge of that there were rights. And the men said that the knowledge, that things did change for some men, not many, but some, in the knowledge that they were kind of saying it actually did result in the more equal the relationship came, they said there were benefits to them. At first they thought it would all be about loss. I can't direct her to do this thing, but there were all these benefits that they didn't anticipate, including they named better sexual relations. Because they had better intimacy, because they had better communication, because they had more equal context, there was more dialogue. And I was saying, I don't think we talk enough about this. Because I reckon if we did, like we're not talking about the things that might actually matter. We talk about our log frames and all the things, but actually it's like what makes life better for people? Can do more equal relationships. What do they result in that are better for you? It's not just about power, but it is about your overall life and whether or not when you make it more equal, it can be better. And what is better? I don't think we have really tapped into the, advertisers do this better than us because they're always trying to really influence norms and behaviours. And they're so successful because they're really appealing to desire and other things. We're so heady, I think, like rational, and we don't really draw on the wealth of knowledge that exists about how actually you change norms and behaviours, how you influence people in positive ways. We're a bit stuck and quite formal and very, I don't know, I feel this sometimes in our program, it's pretty oldie-fashioned. It's all talking, we're not really thinking about, there's a lot of more tools that exist now that we could be accessing that could help us. I think we haven't really cracked that, and until we do, we're screwed, because we cannot change it by ourselves, and it's too tiring. Get burnt out, everyone does, get too lost. So I do feel there is a change. I think this discussion in Australia, even about a more equal parliament, and the number of people standing for Parliament and wanting to actually be enrolled, that's a positive. Now, it's still a certain subset of women. It needs a more diverse Parliament, more culturally diverse, more people of, diverse genders, more people from the LGBTI+ community. I think we just need more of that diversity. I feel like we could unlock it more if we had more insights around the table than we currently do. And I think that's true for our sector as well, right? Really dominated by certain kinds of people who are rising to the top, and we don't have enough transformational work really happening to really tackle what are the barriers to people in our own organisations, and then how we draw on our partnerships and what already exists there in terms of knowledge that we could be sharing back into our own communities. Because I think that exchange of knowledge is not just in one direction. That champion of change, all the work we've done on safer cities in Australia is actually drawn from our work globally, bringing it back into our communities. So I think trying to get more of that dynamism happening, the sharing of good practice and knowledge and what is changing and transformative, that we have to do.
It's interesting what you say about needing to involve the men as well, because I'm involved in a civil society women's empowerment mentoring group in disaster risk reduction, and 60 women globally. And I often, because of the timing and the languages, I end up talking to the Africans quite a lot. I don't get to talk to the Latin Americans so much, it's a bit late for me. But yeah, so it was interesting, like a couple of young women from Tanzania and Zimbabwe was saying a couple of weeks ago, well, once we're empowered now, and once a woman's empowered in the village, a young woman, no one wants to marry her because they're all afraid of it. And you either get empowered or you get married and have children. We can't do both.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of the problems are going to come up, is that when we're talking about development sector and developing countries, you've got that whole historical cultural element that, when we talk about the patriarchal structure, it's there everywhere across the globe. But very particularly culturally in a lot of these developing nations. And that's that extra hurdle you sort of have to get. You shouldn't necessarily change their culture, and you won't change their beliefs. It's just going to be a much longer, harder road to change that mindset in the males, because it's very culturally entrenched in their traditions and stuff, in the way they view the women in their society, both positively and negatively.
Though I think Australia ranks pretty cool.
This has a really good follow. But just you touched on it briefly about like public, the private sector and communications with media and things like that. We talk about law making a lot of like big systemic change, but have any of you had any work working with like big conglomerates of advertising and media that actually also have a really big impact on social norms and behaviour change, and how we use those tools to change?
We haven't, but you've seen the rise of behavioural economics. Sort of how do you nudge people through behaviour into doing certain things, and there's kind of major studies about really small things. The one that I remember is one in the UK, where they wrote to people who hadn't put their tax return in, and what they just changed the wording to say, you are, what the part of the 1% who has failed to put in your tax return, and how they got this massive response. Like, people don't want to be like the 1%, they want to be like everybody else, and they got this massive uptick. So they did a trial. Everyone, they sent the same letter to, and then they sent the one that said, well, that motivated people more. So I think just learning from what exists in the worlds of knowledge that could help us nudge people in the right directions is so definitely seeing that kind of behavioural economics and how that's being utilised much more in our sector. And I have seen some interesting work done, but not really at scale on the media side.
I worked a little bit with the Department of Health and the COVID response, and it was in the community communication and engagement team, and which was a task force of a few thousand that stood up very quickly. And a big thing that we were looking at was they were constantly doing sort of small sample size studies on the behaviours of different groups across Victoria, and then looking at what were the motivations for people to take up certain sort of the COVID guidelines, whatever, wearing masks, staying indoors and whatnot. And so a lot of that was then feeding into some of the communications, and one of the things I worked on was working with all the local councils across Victoria on that messaging to be relevant for their communities. And then that they broke it down, and so one of the things that happened really quickly was this whole staying apart 1.5 metres. All of a sudden Gippsland was like, stay 1 cow apart, because that's what they relate. And so it's just those really simple, the length of cow head to tail, or a surfboard for down on the surf coast, or whatever, or penguins down at Phillip Island and whatnot. So I think one CWA had 37 swans or something. So things like that, identifying those motivations, but then identifying the way to communicate that people get and people understand. And just across Victoria, there were so many different messages that we were seeing for that one, stay 1.5 metres apart, and they all worked. They said as soon as they translated them from this state government purple blah 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 that no one listened to into their local, with their local branding and their local relevant messaging, it really shifted the community behaviours and actions on that. So yeah, I think there's lots of examples that may not be particularly around gender, but that can be looked at in the broader sphere, and yeah, I think COVID's a good one in terms of how different governments.
That's often the key, is you just make the message relatable.
Yeah,
it has to be
exactly.
relatable just to that community, and it makes such a difference.
Yeah.
Barney.
You actually started to go into that space, but I was going to say I work for SAVE, and one of the social enterprises is the Centre for Utilising Behavioural Insights for Children.
Yeah.
So they're actually trying to bring that space into development work, and part of the role is moving it away from just being about health, because that's the area that's typically been funded in research, because health is science and science gets money for research and development doesn't get money for research. But actually thinking about development as a social science, you do need to bring in those things. So I definitely recommend looking that up. And the second one was just an example of what you were talking about before, of a program in Mongolia where I was working, where they Australia Awards program, which is where they send people from a developing country to Australia to do a degree and then go back. They were noticing in Mongolia that while 80% of people getting the scholarships were women, when they returned, 80% of men were getting promotions. So women weren't using that education to actually translate, because they weren't doing any of that transformation work at the cultural community level. So yes, you were educating girls, but it wasn't translated into the outcome that you were seeking. And I'm doing my master's, and I covered the economic empowerment of women in Bangladesh, and it was the same thing. It was like, you can give women jobs, you can give them money, but actually when you went and interviewed the families and talked to their husbands and said, how do you feel about your partner earning money? You weren't having a program that addressed that element. You weren't getting any of the benefits of empowerment. You weren't getting the maximum benefits of empowerment. And so I think, you can't see what you don't measure. And so actually just depending on how we define our programs, that's how we actually start to see where we need to be putting more of the efforts. And it's easy to say because we're all constantly overburdened trying to do everything. But I think it's a really important comment that you made, that it can't just be about empowerment. It actually has to be transformational and change people's hearts and minds and ways of thinking. It's really challenging when you're adding that cultural element, which is why it can't be us as white people going in and trying to change that. So yeah, I know it's not a question, but just wanted to add that.
Yeah, it's a great comment, and I think it speaks to that collaborative element, and probably underlying that is looking at everything as a whole system, not one piece on its own. And anything that you may act on is going to have flow-on effects, but also there's going to be other actions that will influence that or impact that. So having to look at that as a whole system, and that collaborative element of tapping into all of those others that are doing all of those work and working together. No one simple answer.
Very true. It's never a simple answer. Was there another question over this way?
It's a bit off topic. I was going to say, just in line with climate change, and I guess where do you see the future of collaboration in the sector, particularly the aid and development sector, with like the reports that came out around it being, increasingly more, maintaining its relevance, I should say, in that space, and where you just see the future of collaboration within the sector.
So it's a question
of collaboration.
Where do we collaborate?
Yeah, with many different, organisations with similar missions and that sort of thing.
I just think it's going to take all of us, all of us working together. All the challenges we're working on are so large. I don't see this really room very much competition. And a really good example is this challenge we have about hunger and famine. I mean, we've led the coordination, but everyone's come on board. We are better together on that issue. We have shared resources, people have different knowledges. Some people are strong in the media, some will have access to better stories or better data or better research. But collectively, I think we will have much more chance of a genuine push on that issue into our community than if any one of us was doing that by ourselves in a fragmented way. You've seen in the last year the creation of this emergency action alliance for sort of humanitarian disaster. It's our third attempt, but it's the first time we've got 15, 16 of the key agencies together to do that. Our first response was on the Ukraine, but I mean, I think as I say, I've been around for 2 of the attempts. We finally got it up and running. That to me is a positive sign that we acknowledge that there are whole areas where we have to work together. I just don't think, and not just with each other, but with all the people doing work across the whole ecosystem, because we all can, but we have to play, I would say, play to our strengths and not try to be each other, And that requires a kind of giving up of ego and power sometimes. And that's why I love Plan, because I feel like we're not the biggest and we're not the best. That's actually a really nice position to be in, because you can kind of play your role and you can bring others together and you can kind of play a different role. And there's an advantage in being at that level. And I don't want to be the biggest or the best, because I don't think that's our place, but I love the fact that we play to what we're really good at, and then if everyone does that, well, that can work. I've certainly seen there's been a transformation in the leadership of the sector over the last 5 years since I've been in that time. And we talk all the time. The leaders, we share, we talk all the time. We meet for dinner, we collaborate, we've created our own network, and we often problem solve together. We're trying to rethink the way that both leadership and the way we work, because we think that the sector needs to transform as quickly as the world is needing us to transform. So I do think that is the way in the future.
And I think you should all have that mindset so that you can manage that. But I think it is a challenge. People do tend to get stuck in their space and focused on their mission or mandate or whatever. So just encourage you, be one of the people like Suzanne that is always looking up and looking out and saying, how can we do this together and do it better? Because if we have more people like that mentality in the sector, then that collaboration will happen. But it's not, the sector is not organised structurally to collaborate, so it's up to the individuals, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting being a consultant in this space, because sometimes I feel like it's very frustrating because I can't make people
Work
get
together.
together, or I can't decide how they should do the project. So that's the frustrating bit. But on the other hand, sometimes I can actually be a channel between organisations, because I've worked with them and I've worked with them and I have personal contacts. And actually I found myself in this strange position where I've been sort of trying, actually negotiating a collaboration between 2 UN organisations on something that I think is really important. And they sort of went through it like, when we're talking to each other, oh, why aren't you talking to her? Why aren't you talking to them? And like, it was just some misunderstanding. And so it's just very strange to be in this position of exercising informal leadership and informal power in something. And I guess it's only recently that it's occurred to me that I can do that, because I actually have a network that I can bring into play to support what they're doing, because often those people in those organisations are not hired up in the power structure, but if they can make those sideways connections, they can start some really good things. So yeah, I remain optimistic.
Which is also a prerequisite for
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Very much so.
A built-in optimist, yeah.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Any more questions?
I think women in leadership are more collaborative as well
Oh.
in general, and that kind of, in our sector we have more women in leadership. But
I don't know. I just think that it's hard to generalise, but I would say I know that for myself,
I don't feel like there was a playbook that I wanted to follow necessarily. So I have been looking elsewhere, and I would love looking to my people I admire in the world to kind of be more like that. You know? I don't want to be. I saw models of leadership. I didn't want to be that. I saw them exhausted, burnt out. I saw them use power in ways I thought was caused harm. I don't want to be that person, and I don't think leadership has to be that way. But you know, you're making up a playbook, and then you will make mistakes. And I think the other thing is people are less forgiving to women when they do make mistakes. To be honest, I think they hold us to a higher standard. So I do feel that there's less room to muck it up. That's a weight that's unfair. But I feel like, and certainly amongst the group that I've seen, there's just a desire to share and learn together and help each other. And also, I guess that was my realisation, leadership can be a very lonely job. You know, you see things that you can't share with everybody, and how they got to you, and it's really powerful to have other people who also have that challenge to share with and learn from, and depend on, bitch too sometimes, or let go of, debrief with, strategise with, check in with. Certainly, that's been important to me and to my sustainability. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe, trying not to make generalisations, but I feel like women are better at talking. And with that comes an ability to let go of ego and seek better outcomes. For friends, family, community, and I think it just extends to a bigger picture. That's probably a bit of a generalisation, but I feel like certainly the talking is a big generalisation. And I think women generally are able to talk it out, whereas maybe most men hold that back and they're not able to be vulnerable and work through the issues. So I've certainly found, certainly women's groups like this and networks, and have been involved with women in leadership groups as well, and it's just such great learning opportunities and an opportunity to not only lay down on the table what you're being challenged by, but hear others and support others in what they're doing. And I think it's really powerful when women coming together. So keep doing it.
Yeah. This is a bit of a shift. And obviously agree, and women are the most impacted by climate change and all of those things. But also in general, especially in developing countries, women tend to be the least contributing to and have the less resources and be able to make the change less. So while it is super important to have women involved and aware and engaged and understanding it, how do you stop it just becoming another thing that women need to fix, like gender equality? You know, we're the ones that currently need to fix it, just like patriarchy and not being able to get to the systems. How do you get that people who are actually responsible, to be men who are making the policy choices, how do you get their engagement? And also in part of that, when they're doing that change, thinking about it as a gender issue as well, because they're like, oh, it's science, so therefore gender's irrelevant.
I think it is about who's at the table, how do we get more people at the decision-making table and at the design table where you're trying to design solutions, because I really do think, it's just that perspective that you have there that you can bring to bear, because it is deeply a gender issue. I mean, you would see this too. I mean, it absolutely is, and just how do we get those, we've got to get more of those voices, I think, at the table where the decisions are being taken, is what I would say. Or get those people out of their offices, but talking to people about that.
That's a big focus of the Women in Engineering Pacific group. So ultimately, although we're sort of coming together to support each other in development, but in careers and the like, ultimately we're really trying to push for more women in the engineering industries in those countries to be in leadership and decision-making positions alongside others. Like, it's not just about having women, it's about having greater diversity at the decision-making table, and we know that's a long game, but it's just about sort of starting somewhere. And I think as we strengthen in terms of the organisation that we are, we start to draw on what else is everyone else doing, and where do we tap into those other support mechanisms to create impact. That decision-making table is a pretty important place, I think.
And we've used really effectively things like, say, in terms of safer cities, girls' walks, where girls map their own cities and their own experiences of it, and then they take decision makers on a walk around the city through their own eyes, and it's so illuminating. You see these kind of male engineers who have designed the city, kind of going, it never occurred to me that, that overhang means you can't see a person's face, or this kind of lighting, or the way that alleyway is. So I think you can do similar things in climate change, right? You sort of bring people to the places where people are having to really manage disaster and risk, and you're really helping them map, and then you're really taking them on this kind of walk. As you said, if you don't have a mobile phone and the emergency warning system is a text message, you're screwed, because you're out there working and only this one mobile phone and your fella has it, you're dead. So, it's kind of like, how do you think that through and take people, I think on those exposure walks where you're mapping, using that local knowledge and then sharing it back into decision makers and trying then to co-design better solutions. I've seen that work very effectively, and I think it's something we probably need to keep trying to practice.
If you do some work on human-centred design or any design, like empathy is such a big part of that. One of the workshops I did years ago when I was in Timor, there was a whole group of different organisations, and we facilitated a project around disability and WASH, and really sort of working through some new designs for water stations. And I had a bunch of Timorese engineers who did not understand why we would even talk or think about changing the design to be more accessible for people with disabilities. And then we had someone come and talk to them who was male, same age as them, had just been in a car accident and could no longer use his legs and was using a wheelchair. And because his story was so similar to all of theirs, the change in just a couple of days of being with this person was phenomenal, and then they all understood why they needed to think about the designs of these tap stands differently. And it was just that tapping into the empathy, and they could understand and they could connect with that person's story. And so I think story and that sort of empathy aspect is really important in that as well.
You need more engineers like you in development, because one of the arguments that I often find myself having is that infrastructure is not just about building stuff, and so people, this is one of the last bastions of the people think, first of all, it's not even about people, it's about building things, and secondly, how could there be gender involved in infrastructure? It's just stuff that you're putting there, so
So all go and study engineering.
Really nice quote to finish on. Share it.
Sure, absolutely.
It says it can be overwhelming to witness experience or take in all the injustices at the moment. The good news is that they're all connected. So if your little corner of the work involves pulling at one of the threads, you're helping to unravel the whole damn cloth. I think that's a really nice message for our time. It's just keep pulling at your cloth. And know that all those issues, like the gender ones, the climate ones, the poverty, the injustice, they're all connected. So keep pulling at your cloth and know that you're helping part and unravel the whole damn thing, which I think is a really important message.
Thanks for that. That's really, really good. All right, we might wrap that. I'd like to thank our speakers, so Mary, Suzanne and Heidi, very much. If you could thank them very much for a really interesting conversation. For your questions and everything, and I'll hand over to Chris because she'll want to wrap up.
And I also just want to add to those thanks with the most wonderful and very exclusive Women in Aid Development Night, which each of you will receive one of those. Thank you. Thank you so much for speaking. It's so inspiring, it's so fascinating, and I love the fact that the conversation goes in so many ways. Inspiring to speak women. Fabulous, Heidi. And of course, this is your second time with us, and Heidi was one of our volunteers in the past, so really appreciate
Way
it.
at the beginning.
Way at the beginning. Well, the most important foundational person. I love the auntie energy. I'm a godmother of 26, so I love that sort of, getting them going. I'm going to a gig on Thursday. 200 gigs. But you have to be there to support them. And Mary, thank you for bringing an Adelaide perspective and a global perspective, because that is absolutely fantastic in terms of just the fact that we are so distributed around Australia. So thank you very much. And Jill just offered 35-hour flight. So appreciative of your fantastic facilitator. So thank you, Chris. Really appreciate it. And I didn't say at the beginning who we are, and I'm sure all of you have had a quick look, but a bit late. We've been around for 10 years. We are a membership organisation, and we are here because we want to support women like you in your careers and support you to think about leadership, to make sure that you've got some tools and access to people. So we've sort of just grown really, and we're a membership organisation, so feel free to become a member, and your organisation can become a member. Imogen works for Save the Children, they're a member. Vardy's Melbourne Development Circle, they're a member. We've got Oxfam, Sport Matters, where Jill has been, Leprosy Mission, Fred Hollows, so it's from the little wee ones to the very big ones. Go and talk to your CEO. And we've got a mentoring program. We would really love you to think about that. As a mentor and as a mentee, you don't have to be a CEO to be a mentor. You can be somebody who's done a degree at, Melbourne Uni, and you can tell somebody else who wants to do that degree. We do workshops, we've got internships, we have information on Facebook, Instagram, the website, LinkedIn, and we have volunteers. Imogen is our fantastic CRM volunteer. We're about to get a CRM, which is far away. Jill's our city Melbourne leader. Catherine's our event volunteer. We love volunteers. Have a look at the website, see what you can do. All of that goes into your CV. All of that adds to the opportunity for you to get a new job. You'll be on our mailing list now, so you'll hear about our next event. And you'll also get a special email this time, which is to let you know we've got an online event on Monday with a speaker, also an engineer from Vanuatu, and 2 other speakers. And we're doing our first Brisbane event. We have absolutely no contacts in Brisbane. We've got a few people, we've got some brilliant speakers. But if you've got any colleagues or friends, could you please pass it on? We would be incredibly grateful because we need to build our list. And come next time, please. We have, as you can see, we start with one topic, but we go loads of places with these discussions. It's never just about one thing. It really does bring out a whole range of things. And I want a 30-second poll. Our next topic is technology in the aid and development sector. Digital stuff, distance volunteering, crypto, and more. I'm completely, know nothing about it at the moment, but I'm sure I will. Is that a topic that's interesting? Is that something that would bring you out on a cold night? And honest answer, if it's not, no problems, we'll look at it and have a discussion about something else.
Yeah, I would, for sure.
Yeah.
Or if you have suggestions about other topics that you think would be good to cover. We've covered quite a lot in the last couple of years, but happy to.
Yeah, if it's definitely phrased in a way of adaptability and, changing with the environment around us, I think it's really important to have.
And certainly would be focused on technology in the communities that people are working in and delivering solutions, because that is definitely what's happening. Technology is being put into communities. Yeah. I'm seeing a few nods.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so, yes, please come again. We'd love to see you. Don't feel you have to rush away. There's still wine.
Wine, there's still food.
There's a
Probably cool now.
bit of cool food, but go for it. And one of the key things that you come for is networking. So
Yeah, so
we love it. And we'll see you. Thank you.
thank you everyone.